She looked at me, smiled softly, and whispered. "You look just like my first crush." In that moment, everything changed. It was one of those easy Saturday evenings where everything felt familiar and unhurried. My best friend had invited me over to his family's house for a small get-together. The place was alive with the kind of comfort only a lived-in suburban home carries, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the warm glow of lamps casting soft halos across the walls, and the scent of something roasted and rich drifting from the kitchen. I wasn't expecting anything more than laughter, food, and the usual teasing conversations. But then she walked in. His aunt. She moved through the doorway with the kind of calm confidence that makes people notice without her ever asking for it. She looked to be in her early 40s, dressed simply in a soft cream blouse tucked neatly into dark jeans, but somehow her presence made the room fall a little quieter. Her hair, loosely tied back, framed her face in gentle strands, and her eyes carried the kind of warmth that instantly put you at ease, yet also made you sit up straighter. I stood when she was introduced, offering a polite smile. She returned it, but instead of just glancing and moving on, she paused. Her gaze lingered on me, steady and thoughtful, like she was searching for something behind my face. For a brief second, I felt exposed, as though she could read more about me than I intended to show. Then she let out the smallest laugh, not mocking, but nostalgic. "You look just like my first crush," she said softly, her voice carrying that mix of surprise and fond memory. The words landed heavier than I expected. I managed a quiet laugh, unsure if it was a compliment, a coincidence, or something else entirely. My friend brushed it off with a grin, joking about how his aunt was always dramatic, and the conversation moved on. But for me, it didn't move anywhere. Her words stayed. I caught myself glancing at her later across the room, the way she leaned down to listen intently to her sister, the way her hands moved gracefully when she spoke. She had the kind of presence that made you curious. And though her comment had been casual, maybe even playful, it stirred something inside me. A door cracked open, and I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to step through, or if I should. All I knew was that I would remember that smile, and the way she had looked at me, long after the evening ended. The night settled into its rhythm, the kind of soft hum that comes when a house is filled with voices, laughter, and half-empty glasses clinking against wooden tables. By the time the sun slipped beneath the horizon, the patio lights were glowing like tiny stars strung above us, and the air had cooled just enough to carry the faint song of crickets from the grass. I found myself stepping outside, drawn by the quieter space. The patio overlooked a neat backyard, where the shadows of tall fences stretched long and dark across the lawn. The cicadas hummed low in the distance, and the evening smelled faintly of damp earth and the last traces of grilled food. I thought I'd be alone out there, but when I turned, she was already there, his aunt, seated at the far end of the table with a glass of wine in hand. She glanced up at me, her lips curving into that easy, knowing smile. "Escaping the noise too?" she asked, her voice low, touched with humor. I nodded and took a seat across from her, suddenly more aware of my posture, the way my voice sounded, even the rhythm of my breathing. The closeness of the house faded, leaving just the two of us and the soft chorus of night around us. Our conversation started light, books we had both loved, movies we admitted guilty pleasure for, small stories about childhood summers. She had a way of speaking that made even the simplest details feel alive. I noticed how her fingers traced the rim of her glass absent-mindedly, how her laugh came low and warm, lingering just a fraction longer than expected. But it wasn't just her words that held me. It was her gaze. She listened intently, her eyes never darting away too quickly, never distracted. When she looked at me, it felt like she was measuring something, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition. And every time her eyes held mine, I felt the echo of her earlier words, "You look just like my first crush." The more we talked, the more I caught myself leaning forward, wanting to stay close to her voice. Her presence carried a gravity that pulled me in, subtle but undeniable. She seemed both entirely at ease and yet slightly restless, like someone who hadn't expected to enjoy a conversation this much but didn't want to admit it. When her laugh finally faded into silence, there was a pause, heavier than before. The air seemed charged, the space between us shrinking without either of us moving. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew this: whatever was happening, it wasn't casual anymore. By the time the evening edged toward late, the living room was filled with lazy chatter. Some guests had drifted into comfortable silence, others leaned into the television's glow, half watching, half dozing. The noise of the night had softened into a background hum, leaving pockets of quiet around the house. I wandered into the kitchen, half to escape the heaviness of the living room, half to help clear the plates stacked on the counter. The space was warm with the scent of roasted herbs still lingering in the air. A single light over the sink cast a soft glow, leaving the rest of the room dim. She was already there. Her back was to me, shoulders relaxed as she rinsed a glass. The faint clink of water against glass echoed gently in the quiet. When she turned, she looked almost surprised to see me, though her smile came quick, easy, as if she had been expecting it all along. "You don't strike me as the kind of guest who hides from the noise," she teased lightly, drying her hands on a folded towel. "Maybe I was looking for the quiet," I admitted, stacking a plate beside her. She reached for another, and in the motion, her fingers brushed mine. Just the slightest touch, fleeting, but warm enough to make me pause. Her hand lingered a fraction longer than necessary before pulling back, and in that small moment, the kitchen felt charged, as if the walls were holding their breath. She set the plate down, glanced at me, and said softly, "Funny how some faces, they remind us of feelings we thought we'd outgrown." Her voice wasn't playful this time. It carried weight, as though she hadn't meant to say it aloud, but couldn't help herself. The air seemed to thicken around us. I searched her face, trying to read the expression hidden behind her calmness. There was something vulnerable in her eyes, something that slipped through the confident way she carried herself. I wanted to answer, but words felt clumsy. Instead, I just nodded, holding her gaze a second too long. And in that silence, I felt it, that quiet pull, the invisible thread that was slowly drawing us closer. For a brief moment, I wondered if stepping into that kitchen had changed the night forever. The night had thinned down to its softer edges. The living room, once alive with voices, had settled into the hush of tired guests. A couple of people had drifted into sleep where they sat, their heads tilted back, lulled by the flickering light of the television. The glow from the screen painted the walls in shifting colors, and the low murmur of dialogue became little more than background noise. I ended up on the couch beside her. It wasn't intentional at first, just the only open spot, but once I sat down, I realized how close it placed us. The warmth of her shoulder was just an inch from mine, and I could feel the faint brush of her presence like a current running under the surface. She shifted slightly, tucking one leg beneath her, glass of wine still resting lazily in her hand. Her arm stretched across the back of the couch, not touching me, but close enough that I could sense it hovering there. That subtle nearness made the space between us feel charged, fragile. For a while, we said nothing. We watched the light flicker across the room, listening to the steady rhythm of someone's soft snore in the corner. Then she turned her head, her voice quiet but deliberate. "You know," she began, almost as if she were confessing to the darkness rather than to me, "sometimes I feel invisible at nights like these. Everyone sees me, of course. They nod, they smile, they say polite things. But they don't really notice." Her words hung there, heavy and vulnerable. I turned to look at her, but she wasn't watching me. Her gaze was fixed on the television, though her eyes seemed far away, lost in some place she didn't often share. "And tonight?" I asked softly. That was when her eyes found mine again. The corners of her lips lifted just slightly, not quite a smile, not quite sadness. "Tonight I noticed you noticing me." The truth of her words landed deep. There was no playfulness in them, no teasing. Just honesty, laid bare in the dim light of a room that had gone half asleep. I swallowed, unsure how to respond, but caught in her gaze all the same. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I thought about how easy it would be to lean just a little closer. But I didn't. Instead, I sat still, letting the weight of her words settle between us. And in that fragile pause, I understood something. Whatever this was, it had quietly stepped past casual. When the evening wound down, the house shifted into that in-between quiet, not empty yet, but fading. Guests trickled out the front door with soft goodbyes, the clink of car doors and distant engines fading into the night. Inside, the living room lights glowed low, casting long shadows down the hallway. I slipped away for a moment, needing air, needing space from the tangle of feelings I couldn't quite name. The hallway was dim, only a lamp spilling light from a side table. That's when I saw her. She stood near the wall, adjusting the edge of her shawl around her shoulders. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, but there was something in her stillness, like she was gathering herself. When she lifted her head, our eyes met across the short distance, and neither of us looked away. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. There she was, confident, composed, yet I caught the smallest flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She looked at me as if waiting for me to decide something, something that could tip the night in one direction or the other. I took a step closer, then stopped. The air between us tightened, heavy with the things neither of us had said. My thoughts spiraled. She was older, my friend's aunt, someone whose life had already been shaped by years and choices I could only begin to imagine. What would people think? Was I misreading this entirely? I saw her fingers clutch the fabric of her shawl, just for an instant, as though she too was fighting against a tide pulling us closer. She parted her lips, as if to speak, but then closed them again, the silence more telling than any words. I felt the pull, the urge to lean forward, to close the small gap between us. It would have been so easy. A single step, a single breath closer. But respect held me back, anchored me in place. I couldn't cross without knowing it was what she truly wanted. The hallway seemed to stretch, the world narrowing down to just the two of us and the charged space between. My pulse hammered in my chest, caught between longing and restraint. And then she exhaled, the sound soft, almost weary. She gave me a look, not rejection, not permission, but something fragile in between. A look that said she felt it too, but neither of us could claim it yet. So I stayed still, letting the moment pass like a tide receding quietly back into the sea. The house had grown quieter still. Inside, the last few voices blended into a low murmur, softened by the hum of the television. But outside, the night stretched open and alive, cool and fragrant. I stepped into the garden, hoping the air would clear the restless swirl of thoughts in my chest. The backyard was hushed, touched only by the faint sound of wind brushing through leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. A string of fairy lights hung along the fence, their golden glow swaying faintly in the evening breeze. The scent of jasmine drifted through the air, sweet and heady, wrapping the night in something almost dreamlike. I wasn't alone. She was already there, standing near the garden path with her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. Her posture was calm, but her eyes betrayed something else, something unsettled. When she saw me, she didn't look away. Instead, she gave the faintest smile, one that held both invitation and hesitation. "You needed air too?" she asked softly, her voice carrying just enough to meet me in the quiet. I nodded, stepping closer until the grass whispered under my shoes. For a moment, we didn't speak. The night itself seemed to lean in, listening. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small, nervous gesture that contrasted with her usual confidence. And then, almost without thought, she reached out, letting her hand rest lightly on my arm. The touch was gentle, deliberate. My skin warmed beneath her fingertips, and the world narrowed down to that single point of contact. I looked at her, really looked. The way the lights painted her features in soft gold, the way her eyes held mine like they were searching for permission. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the space between us until I could feel the warmth of her breath brushing against my cheek. My heart pounded. The distance between what was and what could be had shrunk to a sliver. She leaned in. Not fully, not yet, but close enough that the night seemed to pause around us. Close enough that I could catch the subtle scent of her perfume, something floral, something quietly elegant. Close enough that if I tilted my head just slightly, our lips would meet. But she didn't close that final gap. She hovered there, suspended in the moment, her eyes half lowered but watching me still. It wasn't a kiss. It was the weight of everything unspoken, desire, fear, the quiet ache of restraint. And in some ways, it felt even more powerful than if she had kissed me outright. When she finally pulled back, it was only by the smallest measure. Her hand lingered on my arm, her touch reluctant to let go. The night air wrapped around us again, cooler now, but my skin still burned where her fingers had been. And in that moment, I knew, whatever this was, neither of us could pretend it didn't exist. By the time the night finally came to an end, the house had fallen into that lingering hush that comes after laughter has faded and doors have closed. Most of the guests had already left, their goodbyes still echoing faintly in the air. Only a handful remained, helping tidy up or gathering their coats. The glow from the living room lamps had dimmed, leaving the house wrapped in a softer, gentler quiet. I stood near the door, waiting for my friend to finish saying his goodnights. My thoughts still carried the garden with me, the jasmine, the hush of fairy lights, the way her breath had brushed against my cheek. That moment had not ended, it had only tucked itself into my chest, alive and restless. And then she appeared again. She moved toward me with the same calm grace she had carried all evening, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders now, her steps unhurried. But there was a new softness in her expression, something more fragile than before. When she stopped in front of me, it felt like the air shifted again, as if the night wasn't ready to let us part without one more moment. For a beat, neither of us spoke. She simply looked at me, her eyes holding mine in a way that made words unnecessary. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand and cupped my face, her palm warm against my skin. The gesture was tender, intimate, filled with a quiet certainty that caught me off guard. She leaned in and pressed her lips softly against my cheek. It wasn't rushed, wasn't casual. It lingered, deliberate and steady, as though she wanted me to feel not just the kiss itself, but the meaning it carried. My breath caught, and for those few seconds, time seemed to still. When she pulled back, she didn't let her hand fall right away. Her thumb brushed lightly against my jaw, and her eyes softened as she whispered, "Maybe you remind me of more than my first crush. Maybe you remind me how it feels to be seen." Her words struck deeper than anything she had said that night. They weren't about comparison anymore, or nostalgia. They were about something present, something alive between us that neither of us had been able to ignore. I wanted to answer, to find the right words, but all I managed was a quiet nod, my voice caught in the weight of the moment. She smiled then, a smile both warm and bittersweet, before finally letting her hand fall away. The night was ending, and so was this chapter, but something in me knew the memory of her touch, her kiss, and her words would not fade easily. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I carried her with me, not as scandal, not as confusion, but as something rare and fragile, the memory of being truly seen, and the quiet intimacy of a connection that would never quite leave me.